Hey friends, Cassie here. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. The other day I did an unboxing of the Brutus Monroe August 2020 inspiration box, which is called Whistling Windmills. And this was an amazing box. If it's still available, I'll have it linked down below in the description box, along with any of the products that are available separately. I'll have those linked down below as well. And I'll have the unboxing if you missed that so that you can check out what actually comes in it. But I had the opportunity to make a bunch of cards. So let's quit gabbing and let's go check out how I made these cards. For the first card, it's actually going to be 4 cards, believe it or not. So I cut down some of the cardstock that came in the kit down to 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And this is going to fit nicely inside of my mini MISTI. I did that for 4 of the colors. I did that for the blue, the green, the light green, and the yellow. And now I'm just arranging some stamps inside of my MISTI. I'm going to grab my magic powder bag, and then I am going to just wipe that all over the front of this panel. And then I'll ink up my images with some Brutus Monroe embossing ink. And then I'm going to cover these with some Alabaster embossing powder. And I am going to repeat this process for all 4 of those panels. So now there's a method to the madness. We are going to end up cutting these into strips, and we'll paper piece them back together, and we'll end up with 4 cards. This is just a super easy way to make, you could do it just making 1 card, of course, but if you've got all those leftover panels, you might as well make 4. And in this case, you could absolutely use this as like a little gift for somebody, like a little gift of 4 cards. You could add more colors to it if you wanted to, just making the panels a little bit smaller when you do start cutting. But we're just going to leave the stamps in place and do the same process for all 4 of those card panels. Now we're going to shift everything after we've cleaned off all of our stamps. I don't show you the cleaning, but I cleaned off all the stamps, and now we're going to rearrange those stamps again. Just moving this around inside of our mini MISTI. Again, you might be able to do this without a mini MISTI, but it would be a little bit more of a process. And so this is why I've decided to just kind of do the MISTI. And then once again, use our magic powder bag because I don't want to get powder anywhere where I don't want it. And that prevents that. And then we'll ink up our stamps with the embossing ink and cover this again with some Alabaster embossing powder. And of course, heat set that till that is smooth and melted. And you'll know that it is ready to go because it goes from a matte finish to a nice bright shiny finish. And of course, Miles wants to come in while I'm using a heat gun, so that's a little dangerous. And he's a little bit of a thief too, so I know he's in here because he wants to grab something and run off with it. And then that has me chasing him down the hall. All right, now we're on to our last bit. So again, I repeat the process for all 4 of our panels. And so here I am just putting the last bits of stamping. And you'll notice, obviously, I'm not doing any overlapping. You could do that if you really, really wanted to, but you'd probably want to use a mask. I wanted these to be fairly quick and simple. And so this is why I'm not doing any overlapping. But I think the end result is something that's pretty cool. And I didn't pay any attention to the fact that none of it's really overlapping. So again, magic powder bag, embossing ink, and then your Alabaster embossing powder. And then heat setting that till that is smooth and melted. And then again, repeating that process for the other 3 panels. And then we'll have those all done. And then we'll move on to our next step. So our next step is to cut those panels down. Because this measured 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, I'm going to trim these off in 1/2 inch sections. So that way they'll be perfect sections. So I have them all stacked up on top of each other, and I'm putting this through my Guillotine trimmer. I can do this because it's 4 panels of a fairly lightweight cardstock. If this were a regular cardstock, I probably wouldn't be able to stack these up 4 on top of each other. And you'll notice I'm trying to keep these sort of in an order because we're going to do some layering. So I have cut down more panels of that lightweight cardstock. These are again 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And now it's just a matter of piecing it together. So I'll start with my yellow piece. And then I'm going to move to the next one that would go below it. But I'm going to grab the light green. And we're going to work in a pattern here. We'll move to the next one that would go right below it. And we'll grab the green. And it's like a puzzle. It's super, super easy. And all I'm doing is putting down some liquid glue just to make sure that I have good coverage. You could do this with like a tape runner as well, but I figured at least with the liquid glue I'd have a little bit of wiggle room. And then once you've gone through your colors, you start over again. And it's great because then you'll have, like I said, leftover pieces to make 3 more cards. And I figured since I already had all the pieces out, I might as well. So we'll repeat the process all the way down. And I just think it's such a fun look to do this paper piecing. And you've got these different color pieces on there. And it makes it look like it was a little more work than it actually was. So I thought that was a lot of fun. You might be able to paper piece all that without the stamping and then stamp afterwards, but this just was kind of fun. And if you end up with leftover on the sides, you can trim that off. All right, we'll get our card bases ready to go, which measure 8.5 inches by 5.5 inches and scored at 4 1/4. So these are side folding A2 size cards. And then we'll just attach down our panels to our card bases. I do have a little bit left over on the side. The reason I have that is because I wanted to put little strips of the copper. So I end up putting 1 strip down and I decide I want another strip. So I'll grab out my T-ruler so that I can line up the next strip. And I'm just lining up the glue first, and then I can stick down my little copper strip on top. You could skip this part, but I really wanted to use some of that copper and have that popping on there. Our next step would be our sentiment. So I have grabbed out the sentiment that says, "I appreciate your kindness." I just love that sentiment. It's something that I can use on a very regular basis. And so I'm going to use this for all 4 of those cards. So I'll stamp this out 4 times onto some white cardstock using my Raven detail ink. Nice crisp black ink. And then once they're all stamped, I'll grab out the guillotine trimmer one more time and I'll trim these down. Surprise, surprise, I stamped fairly straight, so I didn't have to do a lot of correction there. And now I'm going to glue these down on front of the card bases, card panels that are attached to the card bases. And then with that little bit that's left over, I will trim that off. And I'm going to use the sequins that came in this kit to attach down a few sequins just to the front. And I'll do it for all 4 of those cards. But once that is on there, that's going to finish off this bundle of cards. And now I can just package that up with some of that ribbon that came in the kit, and I can hand this off to somebody. Love how those turned out. Card number 2 is going to be a Slimline. You knew it was coming. So I have a panel of that blue cardstock that came in the kit that I've cut down to 3.5 inches by 8.5 inches. And then I'm going to grab one of the pre-made, pre-cut Slimline bases that Brutus Monroe carries, and I'm going to score that at 3.5 inches. So closed, this will be 3.5 inches by 8.5 inches. So it's perfect, and my card panel will fit perfectly on that card base. And I also have a white piece of cardstock ready to go for some stenciling. But before I do that, on my card panel, I've pulled out the stencil of the month for September, and I'm going to grab my Wendy Vecchi Make Art Station, and I'll just tack down my Slimline right onto the Make Art Station. I'm not concerned about the fact that this stencil is a 6x6 and this panel is obviously bigger than that, because that white panel is going to go right over the top. So I don't care that it's not going to line up perfectly. So basically I'll just do the upper portion and then I'll rearrange the stencil and I'll move on to the second portion. So I've got my mini Ergo blending brush along with some Simon Hurley Remember Me ink, and I'm just blending that across that panel. I thought that ink just matched perfectly with the cardstock that came in the kit. And when we're done with that, we'll clean off our stencil and we'll move on to the next step, which would be stenciling the hot air balloon that came in the kit. This is cool. So there's 4 parts to this stencil. I'm going to take some purple tape and kind of mask off that side so I don't get any ink blending on that area. And then I'll use that same Remember Me ink on the first part of the balloon, which, you know, then it'll just match perfectly with that background. I'll clean off my stencil and then we'll move on to this part. This part I actually should have done after the fact, but I knew I was going to be using the velveteen glaze, and so I did kind of screw this up, but I fix it a little bit later. So I have some Grrr ink by Simon Hurley, and I'm just going to sponge that over that lower portion of the balloon. And you know, you could completely skip this portion. You wouldn't have to do this at all if you didn't want to, which looking back I probably shouldn't have, because I didn't apply it appropriately, but it's fine. So now I'm going to kind of line up the basket where I want it to be, and then, you know, go through the whole same process. And I'll use that same Grrr ink for this one, just so that everything is cohesive. Just sponging it on there.
And then I'll clean that off and we'll move on to getting ready to use the Peach Bellini Velveteen Glaze. So we'll line that up, try to use that purple tape to cover up areas that I'm afraid that I'll get the Peach Bellini on, and then use a little bit more purple tape on the side, and then we'll be ready to just adhere this stuff to it. So it's very creamy and super pretty, and it will definitely dry darker than this. So I'm just using a spatula to scrape this across there, and you don't need a lot. If you want it to be thicker, of course, obviously you'd want to put a little more on there, but I'm just putting it on there. I do get some on that background, and I will fix it later after it's dry. I try to wipe some of it away with my finger, but it does kind of stain the paper, but that's not a big deal either. I'll release, or I will take the purple tape off of there and the stencil and clean that off really quickly, and then we will sort of scrape. This is where I realized that that little lower portion of the balloon should have come on after the fact. So I'm just going to kind of take that spatula and kind of move those pieces in just a little bit. You can heat set this, but you definitely want to keep your heat gun moving and do it as low as you can so that nothing bubbles. And then once it's dry, you're going to have this really cool matte finish to it. And now I'm going to stamp some clouds because it definitely needed some more on that background. So I'll grab the clouds that came in this stamp set, and I'm going to stamp that using the same Remember Me ink. And we're just going to stamp all the different clouds just over the background, trying to make sure that they overlap maybe a little bit, not so much that it would be noticeable when you actually stamp it out. And then when I'm happy with how that is, we'll get ready to adhere this down to the card panel, just using some liquid glue. And then when that's on there, we'll we'll move on to making our sentiment. So I did have a strip left over of some white cardstock, so I'm just going to stamp my sentiment, kind of center that a little bit. It's obviously going to be bigger than the panel, but that's okay. We'll take some liquid glue, put that on the back, adhere that down, and then we can flip that over and just trim off the excess. That way I know that I have it perfectly centered and it wasn't, I don't have any spaces on the left or the right hand side of the sentiment. And then we'll adhere this down to our card panel, or our card base, using that same liquid glue. And then our final step would be to do some more embellishing. So we're going to grab some of the orange prism sequins that came in this kit, and we'll just adhere those down to the front just for a little bit of embellishment. And then when that's done, that's going to finish off our second card. You knew I had to make a slimline. Card number 3 looks like it took a little bit more time than it actually did. And I do apologize, my camera, I thought it was running when I started coloring, but it wasn't. So here we are, partially through the coloring. And I'm just using one of the foilables that came in the kit, and I adore these foilables. I love when Brutus Monroe has these. They're just normally, always an amazing buy in my opinion. Because you can foil them. These ones are a little bit more intricate, and so I choose not to foil these. I'm sure it could be done. I usually don't have as much luck with that when they're this intricate, but the intricacy is the reason I love these, because it makes coloring them so simple. They are so detailed that all you have to do is slap a little color down, maybe add a little shadowing and highlights or whatever here and there, and you have an absolutely gorgeous panel. So as you're watching, my coloring, all I did was slap down a little bit of green, put a little bit of highlight or low lights in certain areas, colored the trees one color. I don't even bring in another color for the trees. You could go even more intricate with these, but I just choose not to. And then I'll bring in that green and blend out on the grass a little bit more. And then, I'll start coloring the path. But that's the beauty of these intricate foilable panels, is that it doesn't take a lot of effort, and you can have an absolutely gorgeous finished card. Or heck, you could absolutely frame these. I just think they're so beautiful. And then, you add that this is the type of scene that it is. It reminds me of some sort of not that I've ever been to Italy, but like some sort of Italian villa or something. Just beautiful with the mountainous area back there, which, by the way, obviously that's purple, and I only used 2 purples for that. So again, the intricacy is where it just makes it so easy to have this beautiful, beautiful panel. And then the houses, I'm just going to color the roofs with one brown color. And then the houses themselves I'll bring in like, after I fix a couple of the trees, the houses I'll bring in just one light color, almost like a cream color, and that's that. I do want to do something to the sky, so I am bringing in some Slippery When Wet Simon Hurley ink along with my Ergonomic blending brush, and then I'm just going to gradually bring that color down so that the darkest part is all around the edges, because I clearly don't want all that color to be all over the rest of the panel. I just want it in the sunset or sunrise, whatever you want to call it. And then I'll stamp my sentiment using some Raven Detail ink. I'll attach this down to a card panel or a card base, just using some liquid glue. And that's all I'm going to do to this one, folks. It's just so pretty. I don't think it needs a whole lot more. And you know, you get 8 of those panels in one of the packages, so fabulous. Imagine that as a card set. For card number 4, I had gone ahead and used the Circle Simple Blends by Brutus Monroe along with the Peach Bellini, and I let that dry overnight. I don't know how long exactly you need to let it dry, but I let it dry overnight, and I just think it's such a pretty effect. I went ahead and also cut out the Windmill using the brown cardstock that came in the kit along with the yellow cardstock, and I went ahead and cut out the Windmill portion of the yellow piece because I'm going to paper piece this. So before I do that though, I'm going to attach down my Windmill, my brown Windmill, to some black cardstock. I've just put a little bit of liquid glue behind the areas that I wanted to make sure were secure. This will just make sure that my Windmill is a little bit sturdier. And so now I'm going to glue in the pieces from the Windmill, like the windows and the door, and I'm just going to use my little jewel picker to pick those pieces up and attach those in there. I love doing this, the little extra pieces, the little extra, it's like a little bonus bit. It really makes your pieces look that much more detailed, and I don't know, it's fun. So now that those are in there, I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut around, all around the Windmill itself, actually leaving the portions of the Windmill, the Windmill pieces themselves, I'm going to cut the black away from there. Now this brown cardstock is the cardstock that came in the kit, and it's a little bit less weight, so you do want to be careful if you're doing this. But I think that also actually helps for the cutting around as well. And again, I'm going to take that yellow part of the Windmill and I'm going to attach that right over the brown pieces. So that way it has a little bit of, it's just a little different, and it makes those Windmill pieces even that much stronger. I'm not going to put any foam tape or anything like that behind this. That would just be kind of a pain with all those holes in the Windmill. But I am going to just take some liquid glue and adhere this down, and we'll do the same thing with the Windmill once it's all ready to go. But this Windmill is so cool, and honestly I don't think I've seen anything like this stamp set or this Windmill die itself on the market, which makes it even that much sweeter. I know some of my friends in other countries have mentioned that they think that that is really neat. Alright, so now that that's all put together, we'll move on to our next step, which would be the sentiment. So I have some black cardstock. I'm going to use my magic powder bag over the top of that. We'll ink up our sentiment with some embossing ink by Brutus Monroe, and then we'll stamp that sentiment down, and then we'll cover this with some Alabaster embossing powder. And then we'll heat set that till that is smooth and melted. I didn't do the best job stamping it out by itself, so in some of those areas the ink didn't adhere all the way down, and so in that case I didn't get the best powder coverage. So because of that, I'm actually going to take a white gel pen and just fill in those areas that I didn't do the best job of stamping out. So that's a little trick. If your sentiments don't stamp out perfectly and you use white, you can always go over it with some gel pen just to fix those little areas. To trim out that sentiment, I'm going to stick this into my Guillotine trimmer and trim that down. And then we'll take that piece right there and we'll get ready to adhere it to the front of our card panel. Now the card panel itself does measure 4 1/4 inches by 5 1/2, but I'm going to trim this down a little bit, partly because that black wasn't totally straight on the right hand side, so I'm going to trim this down to be about 4 inches just on those two sides. And then we'll adhere down our panel to another yellow panel just to make that yellow pop even more. And then we're going to get our card base ready to go. And we'll attach that down to our card base, just using that same liquid glue. Now we've got to attach our windmill. I mean, I suppose you could use some sort of foam tape, but just to save myself the headache, we're just going to use liquid glue. And just make sure that we have enough glue on our windmill pieces to make sure that those don't get picked up when I go to put it inside of the envelope. And then we'll attach that down to the center. We do need to add some embellishments, so we're going to grab some more of those orange prism sequins from the sequin mix. And then that's going to finish off card number 4. There's just so many elements in this kit. You could make cards for days. So for our 5th card, we have a piece of watercolor cardstock that I have cut down to 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, and I'm going to ink up the stamps that came from the stamp set. I love these gorgeous hot air balloons and that beautiful scene, and we are using some Raven Detail ink. This ink is perfect for watercoloring, and it's also great for Copic coloring or any alcohol marker coloring. So keep that in mind. This is a great ink for all those. And I made sure to stamp it a couple times, but because it does have a little bit of dampness to it, I went ahead and heat set that before we move on to the next part. We're going to use some aqua pigments on a tonic mat that I have. And that aqua pigment was the color Sunflower. I love this stuff because it has some shimmer to it. And all I did was put it down on my mat, and I'm just squishing my page right into that. I'm kind of creating what we like to call an underpainting. And it's super, super subtle. That's why the yellow is great. And then I'm just going to do it again just to add a little bit more texture to that background. Even though it's yellow, it will add a little bit of texture. You can see that in those areas. And now I want to do some painting. So I put some lime aqua pigment onto my glass mat. And the lime is another one that has a lot of shimmer. In fact, I think all the colors that I chose for this card have shimmer in them, and I'll show you that at the end. And I did choose a light green color because I do plan to put a little bit of that color, or not a little bit of that color, I plan to put other colors over the top of it because this is a green and I want to add some like pinks and purples to the flowers. Usually pink and green don't necessarily play well together. And so I wanted it to be a very light color just in case it did turn sort of brown. And the nice thing about adding the underpainting or the sunflower color to the background is that basically everything is colored right now. So everything has at least some color. Now you just have to add color over the top of it. And I chose a light yellow because lavender and yellow don't typically go together either. So now all I'm doing is dotting this onto the flowers. And this is sped up like about 4 times. I'm just dotting that. And you can see it. It looks nice and pretty. And as I said before, the amazing thing about the super detailed stamps is that they're very, very forgiving. It's almost hard to screw them up. And this is another reason why I like to start light and then you can go darker because, then you can kind of see, where the progression needs to be. And so I'm just dotting those colors, both that pink and that's the dahlia, and then lavender are those 2 colors that I chose. The blue color that I'm bringing in is delphinium, and I'm going to color that over the hot air balloons. Just add a little pop of that blue, which is fun. It makes those hot air balloons stand out a little bit more. And then I do decide to bring in that pink in the next chevron, but before I do that I want to do some splatter. I think splattering these is so much fun because they do add some shimmer, so I didn't want to get that all over the sky, and so I just kind of covered that with a piece of cardstock and then did my splattering of the blue all over the lower half. I didn't want the pink to be, or the blue to be too pink, so I decided to put, I didn't want the blue to be too blue, and so I put some lavender over the top of it. And then I mixed the pink and the green together to get almost like a brown for the baskets. And that is going to finish off that panel. Now I'm going to put some foam tape all over our back panel. I did trim this panel down. It is now 4 inches by 5, a little over 5 1/4. And then I'm going to peel off all the release paper from the foam tape using my paper piercer. It just makes it that much easier to pick up the paper. And then we'll attach this piece down to our card base, and I'm going to attach it to the to the very top of the card, so there will just be a border around the left, the right, and the bottom portion of my panel. And then that's actually going to finish off the card. I didn't add any embellishments. We just have splatter and lots of shimmer. I did make a bonus card. It uses another one of those foilable panels, so I'll show you that one here in just a second. And again, super easy to create. And then I would like to take a look at all the cards that I made today. I would love to know if you had a favorite out of any of these cards or groupings of cards. If you did, please leave that in the comments section down below. You know, your comments, your liking, and your subscribing, all that really does help my channel quite a bit. It lets YouTube know that you like my content, and it'll put it out there for others to see as well. So I do appreciate that. And of course, you guys using my affiliate links. So if you liked this video, please hit that like button, subscribe if you have not already done so. And as always, I will see you very soon in another video. Bye, everybody.